a.m. And we're going to start with We Bring the Sacrifice of Praise. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. And we offer up to you the sacrifices of thanksgiving. And we offer up to you the sacrifices of joy. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. We bring the sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. And we offer up to you the sacrifices of thanksgiving. And we offer up to you the sacrifices of joy. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for this chance to gather in your name and in your presence to study your word and to contemplate our relationship with you. We bring the sacrifice of praise and our lives to this time and to this place. We love you and are grateful for your presence. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So we are in our I'd say our third reading from our new book, Devotional Classics. And if this is your first time here, this is the section on prayer. Thomas Merton is the author, and we're talking about prayer and meditation. And we can see this is on page 65 in your books, if you're following along. And if you're joining in, you can really join in at any time. If you have the book, if you don't have the book, it's going to be up on the screen. And we're really, one topic is not a prerequisite for the next topic. So you can kind of come and go as you need to. So welcome Judy and Joy that are so far joining us this morning. Good to see you. And nice to see you guys sitting here with me. I believe, did we do number 3 or did we finish number 3? Does anybody remember?
Well, we were half done.
I remember that.
I remember 3. Okay, so let's jump into 3. I think the goal is going to be maybe no more than 2 sessions for each chapter, because there's not too many pages. There's a lot of material to cover. We'll do our best. Sometimes we get stuck in a conversation, but a lot of times the reason we're stuck is because it's a good conversation, and we need to talk about it.
I like to apply what I've read, because if I just read words without making it real,
Right.
I don't know the words for it, but
And that's what we're doing while we're sitting here, is trying to see how does this really work, for us. So we'll look at the will of God. This is section 3, where's the page number? 66. Making you dizzy at home. Sorry about that. All right. Right away, we confront one of the problems of the life of prayer, that of learning when one's efforts are enlightened and well-directed, and when they spring simply from our confused whims and immature desires. It would be a mistake to suppose that mere goodwill by itself is a sufficient guarantee that all our efforts will finally attain a good result. Serious mistakes can be made even with the greatest goodwill. Certain temptations and delusions are to be regarded as a normal part of the life of prayer. But when we think we have attained a certain degree of skill in contemplation, we may find ourselves getting all kinds of strange ideas We may even cling to them with a fierce dedication, convinced that they are supernatural graces and signs of God's blessings upon our efforts, when in fact they simply show that one has gone off the right track and is perhaps in serious danger. All right, so that seems kind of heavy. That seems kind of, it seems like prayer is not something to be entered into lightly, just kind of based on the way he's describing it. So it's not just our goodwill that's a sufficient guarantee that the efforts of prayer will attain a good result. So this is like, it's not a quote from the Bible, it's a quote that's out there. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So good intentions in themselves do not guarantee that we end up going in the right direction. There is, and this is basically declaring that there is such a thing as truth or correctness or rightness. Just because we have a good heart, we want to bring that into prayer, right? We want to have goodwill. We want to expect good things. We don't come into prayer expecting bad things. Jesus talks about this. If a child asks a father for a fish, will he give him a snake or something like that? So there's, and then he goes on to say, ask whatever you will and your father will give it to you. So there is this, we do come into prayer expecting good things to happen. That is, but what it's saying is that in itself isn't a guarantee that you'll have a successful prayer experience. So then the question is, what is a successful prayer experience? How do we know if we're doing it right? How do we know if we really prayed or if we were just kind of imagining something? That I guess is the question. He seems to be just maybe warning us, letting us know that we won't always feel that our prayer was quote successful. It could have been better. This would be like, I don't think it necessarily means we can pray right and we can pray wrong, or we can, prayer can be fruitful and worthwhile or just a waste of time. I don't think it's necessarily that like black and white. But what I think he's saying is that there really is such a thing as successful prayer, something that truly does deepen our relationship with God, that helps to transform us, an experience of connection with the divine. But what I think, again, what he's saying, a lot of this seems to be interpreting what he's saying. But I think sometimes maybe we're bringing expectations into prayer as to what it's going to be, and even maybe leaving prayer thinking that was a good one or that was lousy. And the thing is, he's saying, maybe don't be so quick to judge what is successful and what is not successful, because it could be that we come into prayer with expectations and leave feeling badly when in fact something really fruitful took place. And it can be the opposite. We think something's great and really it was like nothing happened, Maybe we would compare this again to our conversations with one another, our interactions with one another. Would we classify all of our conversations with other people as successful or not successful? We may engage in a conversation with a certain agenda or certain something in mind, and if we don't succeed, we can go into conversations trying to sell somebody something. Remember as a kid, especially as a teenager, you go and you're going to have that conversation with your parents, asking them if you can do something, And if they said no, you failed, right? So in a way, is that how we're approaching our prayer time with God? Is that, are we limiting our engagement with God with that, where we clearly know what we're coming away with? I think this is letting us know it's kind of more complicated than that.
Do you ever do that, either with God or with another person? Do you ever evaluate what you said?
I think so, yeah.
Lots.
I mean, I think I may step away and say, I wish I had not have said that.
Or said it differently.
Or said it
Yes.
differently.
Because sometimes, like with me, I'm so sharp that I'll hurt the person's feeling and then realize it like 20 minutes later.
And you didn't intend to do that, but you did want to share information or something.
And
I this would have been in my early 20s. My brother, there's 3 boys. I'm the oldest of 3. So my middle brother was got engaged. And he was the first of the 3 of us to get engaged. And because of a lot of things happening at that time, it's like, I think I've shared with you, all of us, my dad and my 2 brothers and myself, we all met our wives at the same church. So at this particular point in time, the church had this big split. And so our family was staying at the church, and the fiance of my brother was a family that had left the church. So it was a big deal, you know, friendships and everything was all upside down, and everybody was hurt and angry and all of that kind of thing. And I remember having a conversation with my brother about, like, you probably don't want to do this. Well, they're still married. She's still my sister-in-law. They've been married longer than Sully and I have been married. Looking back, it was very short-sighted. It was that conversation that I had was motivated by these circumstances that were going on. And later on, I would leave the church. It just took me a lot longer to do it. You know, they were ahead of the game. And so, you know, over the years, we've talked about those experiences. I haven't talked to her about how I told him not to marry her. But anyway, that's one of those things where it was not long after that I realized that was really hurtful. You know, he's sharing this good news with me, and it's like I was looking out for him, you know, or was trying to. That was my good intentions, right? But anyway, so yeah, I think we can judge our conversations, and we can judge our prayers. Maybe we can go into a prayer time and come away and say, why did I say that? Why did I pray that? You know, why did...
But don't you hope that God is understanding your
Oh,
heart, you know?
absolutely,
He
absolutely.
expected you to not be and have that attitude.
Yeah, I think it's more like there's a Chris Farley character from Saturday Night Live, and he's a journalist, and he interviews celebrities. And so he sits down with celebrities and he asks questions, and he asks the dumbest questions. And so he'd say things like, you remember that part in the movie where you said that thing and then everybody laughed? And the celebrity's like, yeah. He's like, that was awesome. and then eventually, later in the conversation, he would go, stupid. You know, that was kind of this character that would come back in these skits. So sometimes maybe it's like that, and it's not, again, like you said, it's not that God doesn't understand, but I guess I would say it this way. I remember learning as I was growing from, you know, a kid to a teenager to an adult. I would look back and think, I was such a kid. I was so immature. I was silly. And it doesn't mean that I was wrong to do what I did. But a lot of times you do things that are just, it's a 5-year-old thing to do. It's a 5-year-old thing to say. We shouldn't shame ourselves, we shouldn't be ashamed of those things. But I think as we grow and we look back at the things that we did, that we wouldn't do the same now, there is some discomfort in growing. There is some discomfort in raising your hand in class and you had the wrong answer. There's discomfort in that, but you learn. You learn along the way. So.
But isn't prayer about like trying to ask God to help you shape your character and?
So we should be happy when that happens. I mean, we should, it's not only discomfort or thinking we're silly that's the response to growth. There's probably joy, there's relief, there's that too. I guess the thing is there's a range. It's letting you know it's not just good intentions that get good results. Because that would mean if you came away from prayer and it was not successful, you'd say, well, that's my fault. And the thing is, like, none of this is anybody's fault. It's not, you wouldn't say it's your fault that you're not mature as a 12-year-old when you're a 6-year-old. It's not your fault. We're not going to say fault as if it's something that you could help or something that could have been done differently. That's just how we are. And I think we should. I think there's different types of Christian maturity that we may look back on. I think there are some things that we get really riled up about as Christians, and we say that's not a Christian thing to do, and we can be upset about it, when in fact it might be a good Christian thing to do for somebody who's at a different place in their journey. Maybe later on we don't think of things that way. I think there are ways to grow through our Christianity that, at the moment it was good. It's like there's certain things we learn. We learn as we're in school. We learn the vowels, A-E-I-O-U, right? And then later on, you learn and sometimes Y. So you see, but you're not going to teach that first. You don't teach that there are exceptions to the rule until you've already taught the rule. And the same goes with Christianity. It's like, God says, don't eat lobster in the Old Testament. And then later on, God says, well, all things are clean. Now, some of that is in regards to the Jews are God's chosen people versus actually we're all God's chosen people. So there's this learning curve along the way. It's like you need to understand what chosen people are first before you realize what it means for us all to be God's chosen people. You need to learn the line between what is clean and healthy food and what is not before God says, well, actually, I declare everything to be clean. So, I mean, it's tough because I think there are some Christian principles that are more, they're early stage Christian principles that later on we find there are exceptions to these rules.
Yeah, that to me is a most important thing about going through life is learning to reflect without guilt. One of the first things I learned in this group is I had a bridge fall out, and before I could get a new one put in, I had to go to my husband's best friend's funeral, and he gave the eulogy, and I'm there without teeth. And I felt so bad about it. And then I realized guilt isn't helping this. And so I really learned right away that I've heard this so much and never connected till I realized I wasn't helping, focusing on me at my friend's funeral.
Right.
So reflection it doesn't mean I should feel mean and guilty that I was like that. It's just I've learned something.
Right. I'm not sure that I couldn't think of examples like right away. This second paragraph, certain temptations and delusions are to be regarded as a normal part of the life of prayer. I don't know what a temptation or a delusion would be. Maybe one of them is to kind of already assume that we know what God's will is for a situation. So that's a tricky one, because sometimes that can be sometimes us saying, well, God's will, whatever, God will do whatever God wants to do. Sometimes that is used as a lack of faith. God's not really going to come in and make this better, So on the other hand, we shouldn't just assume that God wants things to be a certain way. So maybe those are temptations or delusions. Anyway, all right, let's keep moving on here. Guiding the beginner. For this reason, humility and docile acceptance of sound advice are very necessary for a life of prayer. Through spiritual direction, though spiritual direction may not be necessary in the ordinary Christian life, and though a monk may be able to get along to some extent without it, many have too, it becomes a moral necessity for anyone who is trying to deepen his or her life of prayer. The spiritual director is someone who is capable of guiding the beginner in the ways of prayer and detecting any sign of misguided zeal and wrong-headed effort. Such a one should be listened to and obeyed, especially when the director cautions against the use of certain methods and practices which he sees to be out of place or harmful in a particular case, or when he declines to accept certain experiences as progress. All right. Is everybody familiar with the concept of a spiritual director? It's actually, I think, a more Catholic concept. So a spiritual director is kind of somebody that you go and sit with. It's kind of like a therapist in a way, but it's really not about the content is really your spiritual life, is what you talk to about. I did this for a few years. I had she was a nun at a convent that was not far from the house, and I saw her for 2 or 3 years, and it was very beneficial, I felt, for my own spiritual life. Just kind of sitting there and talking about your spiritual experiences, your life of faith, your experiences and things like that. So what he's saying here is if we're serious about prayer, it's important to have a spiritual director. Now, if that means to formally have that, you can go online and you can find a spiritual director. I have somebody who kind of fulfills a role of therapist and spiritual director at the same time that I meet once a month, and I've been with him for 5, 6, 7 years, 5 or 6 years maybe. He lives in Chicago, and we meet once a month for an hour online, and I talk about my personal life, I talk about my spiritual life, and he's there to listen, he's there to give some advice, some direction, and things like that. I would highly recommend something like that. You know, whether you do that formally or you have that, you know, there's somebody that's a friend or a neighbor or a family member that is a trustworthy person that you kind of submit your, you know, you're looking to them to give you honest and kind of authoritative feedback. You take their advice seriously. And so this can be very helpful in the life of prayer, because if we're just going about it on our own, sometimes it's hard to know. It's like, am I getting it? Am I growing closer to God? Am I really maturing as a Christian? It's when I have like a sounding board, somebody that I can share with that is, you know, hopefully somebody that has years of wisdom beyond us or experience beyond us or education beyond us or something like that, and they can offer advice. So he's saying this is a moral necessity, and a lot of the reason for that is that as we share our experiences, we need to learn, are these things helpful or not? So an example might be, one of the things that is part of spiritual practices would be fasting. And some people engage in it regularly or often. Some don't do it at all. Some do it like seasonally, you know, when we go into the season of Lent, maybe that's the time. But this is kind of one way to add some kind of a dimension to the life of prayer. Because when you're not eating, it changes the way that you perceive your life. The where you would want some help is to determine, is this a good time for me to fast and include this in my prayer life? My attitude toward fasting is maybe something that needs to be considered. If I get to the place where I say to myself, you know, every time I fast, I always have a better prayer life. And when I don't fast, I don't have a better prayer life. So I should fast more often, and I should tell other people to fast more often, because that is the key, or one of the keys to a better prayer life. If you submit that to a spiritual director, they may say, you may have found it to be helpful, but let's really look closely at what is it that makes it different. One of the things that the author Thomas Merton was saying here at the beginning is there's not really no magic. There's no magic to it. There's no tricks. There's no practices that really make it happen or not. There can be other things. We can find certain things to be successful. Maybe if we begin our prayer a certain way. Sometimes maybe we need to sit and listen to some music for a while to just kind of calm down, you know, try to put the day aside. Maybe that can be helpful. That's good, but do we then think that it's necessary, if I don't have my music, I can't really pray? You know? Or to think like, this music thing is really taking me to the next level, so I'm going to really... So that may be something. There may be, maybe we begin our prayer with a time of thanksgiving. You know, God, thank you for all this stuff. And we kind of, that generates this positive thing, right? That's good. Do we get to the place where we insist we have to do that before we go into prayer? Well, maybe there's other types of prayer. You know, if I'm at a place where I'm grieving a major loss, you know, say somebody close to you has just died, it's like, is going into a time of thanksgiving going to be productive, the most productive thing to do in that time of prayer? That could end up making you more angry, or it could maybe encourage us to be in denial. So maybe it's not every circumstance. Maybe there's a time when we're going into prayer and we're very upset about something. and going in. Maybe we need the time of Thanksgiving, and maybe the time of Thanksgiving. So with the spiritual director, we would have conversations about that. When are these methods helpful, and how tightly do we hold on to these methods? Sometimes the idea is we need to. This is in the New Testament. We need to ask for forgiveness before we go and have communion. And if we don't, then we take communion unworthily, and that's a bad thing. It's like it doesn't count. So the scripture that's there is probably not so much about the process and the practice of, before you put that bread in your mouth, you need to say you're sorry. All right? That's really maybe not what the teaching is all about. What the teaching is all about is, what is your priority? And are you separating your spiritual life from your personal relationships? So if you can go to God and you can be fine with God, but then on the side you hate your brother and sister, and what that scripture is saying is, like, these things are related to one another. We can't be bipolar about it, where we're like, we act one way and then we turn around and act another way. And we can do that a lot in church. We can be like, oh, we're going to go help these poor kids, and then we're going to volunteer, with these needy people, and we're going to give generously to the church, and then I'm going to turn around and gossip about somebody. And, it's like, no, we got to integrate all of these things in. So it's not that our prayer has to be tied to some kind of systematic way of doing it. And we don't need to be thinking we have a system down that's like, not only is it successful, but it's like better than all the other systems, right? And what he's saying is, like, let's not get caught into that. So we're like a beginner. That's kind of the attitude. The attitude is, I'm humble because I have a lot to learn. I'm humble because I haven't figured all this out. I'm humble because I feel in some ways I'm still a beginner, even though I've been doing this for a long time. That's kind of the attitude that we're having. We're accepting sound advice. So that means we don't get to the place where it's like, I don't have to grow anymore. I don't have to transform anymore because I'm finally holy. I finally made it. I'm not like I used to be. I'm a good person now. I used to be a bad person. Now I'm a good, it's not like that. It's like, no, we stay humble, and not because we're still a lousy person, or we're still a piece of garbage, or we're still not worthy. That's not what that means. It just means we still need to be pliable and moldable, because that's the way it's always going to be. We're always going to be learning stuff, even though we know more than we did before.
I don't know who said it, but someone said the unexamined life is not worth living.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they were anybody, just a comedian. But I felt that's been really good in my life, because I've always tried to find small groups where when I say something, you just don't say, oh, it'll be all right.
Right.
I want to be able to reflect on it honestly and see and now I live a life that's much freer than I had at 40.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just, I don't know, I think reflecting on with people who are serious about the spiritual personality is very important.
That's good. And reflecting with humility and openness to sound advice is it'll create a positive experience. All right, number 5, resisting God. The right use of effort is determined by the indication of God's will and grace. When one is simply obeying God, a little effort goes a long way. When one is in fact resisting Him, though claiming to have no other intention than that of fulfilling His will, no amount of effort can produce a good result. On the contrary, the stubborn ability to go on resisting God in spite of ever clearer indications of his will, is a sign that one is in great spiritual danger. Quite often, we are not able to see this in ourselves. This is another reason why a spiritual director may be really necessary. The work of the spiritual director consists not so much in teaching us a secret and infallible method for attaining to esoteric experiences, but in showing us how to recognize God's grace and his will, how to be humble and patient, how to develop insight into our own difficulties, how to remove the main obstacles keeping us from becoming people of prayer. All right, so this is a major part of prayer, is us learning and discovering God's will, trying to interpret or discern God's will. This is always something we do with humility and with faith and with openness, because what we may assume is God's will may not be God's will. There's even I think a process where it would appear to us that God's will has changed, and I would say, there are places in the Bible where God changes his mind. You know, there's the story with Abraham, and Abraham is trying to save the city of Sodom and Gomorrah where his nephew Lot is, and he gets into this kind of back and forth with God, saying, God, if we can find a certain amount of faithful people in the city, will you spare this city? Because God has told him he's going to destroy the city because it's wicked. And God's like, okay, well, if we find 100 people that are, then I won't destroy it. And he's like, well, what about 50? And he's like, okay. What about? So it's this. So in that dialogue, it kind of feels like God changes his mind. God is like, well, I was going to destroy it, but now that you bring it up, obviously God knows everything and what we're thinking and all of that. I think it could appear to us that God is changing his mind, but I would gather that it's not that simple. It's more like there's something.
We're changing our mind. God's not.
We're changing our mind, or we're changing our perception of. I have, if I think of like Ian asking me something, it may appear that my opinion on something has changed, but some of that has to do with where he's coming from. I want to know where his heart is. I want to know what he's thinking. And it's like, well, if your attitude is like this, then the answer is no. But if your attitude is different, actually the answer is yes. So it could be kind of a relative situation. I remember us being in seminary, and I had some friends that were the same age as me, so we're like in our mid to late 20s, and we're all single guys, and we always have conversations about getting married and finding the right one and all that kind of a thing, And so a lot of times this is where we ask ourselves, well, what is God's will? Does God want me to marry this one or this one or this one or this one? And the simplest explanation is that God has one choice and the rest are like plan B, plan C, or that kind of a thing. And we just want the right one. I remember thinking one time that, and I think this is still true, being in a relationship with another person is not right or wrong. It really just comes with a series of pros and cons, right? If you're with this person, you're going to experience these pros and these cons. If you're with this person, you're going to experience these pros and these cons. So you could have this broad range of possible successful relationships that in reality create very different experiences for you. And there might be some people that the cons are so bad in comparison to the pros, it would be kind of silly to be with that person. So that's kind of like saying no. But I guess I viewed it as, I think there are a lot of options out there. And I think this is the case for not just choosing a spouse, but in terms of like, what kind of day do you want to have? Well, if you're going to have these sets of things as your goals for today, here's some pros and here's some cons, things that you will experience with those goals in mind. But if those goals change, you have another series of pros and cons. It makes us look at God's will as not just this very simple, do you want me to do this? Yes or no. God is like, well, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Ultimately, the thing is, we want to grow as a person and we want to get closer to God. Each and every step of what we do may appear to lead toward that or away from that, but it's really not that. It's not that simple.
How do we dare to assume what God's will is?
I don't think we can ever really know. I don't think we can know in the sense like we know other things. I know 2 + 2 is 4. I am certain of that. But with God's will, I feel confident. Did I marry the right person? Did I go into the right profession? I hope so. I feel like that is the case. I feel that I was following God's will by doing these things. But it doesn't mean that I haven't been without my doubts. There's some times where I've doubted, did I make the right choice? For lots of things. We can never know for sure, but that doesn't mean we give up on trying to determine, something that's good.
That's something that God's will. You're supposed to read so much in the Bible about trying to do God's will and who we are. And I've spent probably maybe a decade trying to figure out how I know that. I have a hard time making choices. And therefore, I would rather let somebody else do it unless I'm really pent up about it, which isn't too often. So I've been trying to figure that out, and I kind of feel like maybe that's where other people come in. I can get opinions if someone's dialoguing with me. Mm-hmm. And as I look back over my life, actually, most of my spiritual growth, I look back, was because of feelings I had to do this. I'm motivated. I want to do this. Not that I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Mm-hmm. And it's been so hard, and I'm still not able to tell whether I'm doing something because God wants me to. But I do feel like I'm closer to not doing the wrong thing. Well, I shouldn't even say that. I don't. The wrong things can teach me how to do it right next time.
So I love a good mystery story, right? Whether it's like a crime, murder whodunit, or some other kind of a mystery movie story series or something like that. And I like it because there's some answer that we're waiting for at the end. How did this happen? So who is it? Who did it? And a good story will be complicated, and it'll make you think, and you're trying to solve this, and you get to a place where like, oh, the butler did it. It all makes sense now. And I think we want God's will to be like that. That's how we want it to be. We want it to be like this mystery that we solve, that we're finally at a place where it's like, aha, I knew what God's will was all along from the beginning, or I never saw that coming, but I don't think that we have the satisfaction like we do at the end of a mystery novel, There's nothing worse than, there's a lot of shows out there, unsolved mysteries, You know, when you watch this thing and then they tell you, and it's still unsolved, and you're like, seriously? Did I just sit here for all this time and it's still unsolved? We still don't know? So we want to know. And the only thing that I would say is, I think we can have peace in our hearts. You know, I think that's about as good as it gets. I don't think we're ever going to be 100% like in other areas of our life saying, I know what God's will was and this is what it was, period. Because, you know, there's major things that have happened. I used to ask this growing up. You know, my mom dies when I'm 14 years old. So the question was that God's will? You know, so sometimes as the years went on, I would say, oh, wow, look at these things that happened in my life that were so amazing that never could have happened. They never would have happened if my mom hadn't died. So maybe it was God's will so that these good, you know, I never would have met my wife. I never would have had my son if my mom hadn't died. You know, so that's a weird game that we can play where we can look at the evidence and we can say, okay, well, I guess it was God's will. But there's other times where it's like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. The things don't add up. I don't even know if we can use that whole "is it God's will" to answer every question. You know, I mean, we picked this song to sing today. Was this God's will? Actually, God wanted us to sing a different song, but we sang this song. No wonder it didn't go over so good. You know, did God want me to forget to brush my teeth this morning? You know? So, and we would do, I've heard these explanations for things where it's like, you know, so-and-so was in a car accident, but because they were in a car accident, it made them avoid this horrible thing that would have happened otherwise. You know, the person they got in a car accident so they didn't get on the Titanic, you know? And it's like, oh, that car accident must have been God's will, so I didn't die. You know, so this thing, it can get to be kind of ridiculous,
Well,
you know? So it's like, oh, but it was God's will for all those people on Titanic to die. It's like, this is where it gets a little frustrating to talk about God's will sometimes.
What I'm supposed to do, though, is when there's a choice, like when our office burned down and we lost a $100,000 computer, we got paid for other things, like $60,000 worth of stuff. Well, should we reopen a new business or just let it go and go find jobs? And that, I was so afraid, not knowing the future. I was paralyzed almost. Mm-hmm. But my optimistic husband and the insurance company said they won't give me any of it unless we open another business. So we talked about it and said, well, but see, I can't make those kind of choices. I guess I have too much fear in my way. What path I take will be the wrong one.
So there's there's a lot of different personality tests out there. One of the ones that's been used for a long time is the Myers-Briggs personality test. It has 4 different letters, and there's 16 different combinations of personality types. So there's an I or an E, an N or a S, an F or a T, a J or a P. So you end up with this combination of, and then you look at the description of the personality type, and there are 16 different unique types, right? So the last letter is related to the way that we make decisions. And essentially what it is that there's a category of people. Some people want more information before they make a decision. And some people want to make the decision now and deal with the consequences. So some people like it sooner, and some people want to wait. That's the difference between judging and perceiving, is what it's called. So a lot of people, they just want more information and more information. They would prefer it never to make a decision. And then others are like, they're making a decision before we even know what's happening. They're like already made up their mind. But a lot of it's just kind of the way that we're wired. All right, let's keep on. I think we can do this. The tricks of spiritual life. These obstacles may have very deep roots in our character, and in fact, we may eventually learn that a whole lifetime will barely be sufficient for their removal. For example, many people who have a few natural gifts and a little ingenuity tend to imagine that they can quite easily learn by their own cleverness to master the methods, one might say, of the tricks of spiritual life. The only problem is that in the spiritual life, there are no tricks and no shortcuts. Those who imagine that they can discover spiritual gimmicks and put them to work for themselves usually ignore God's will and His grace. They're self-confident and even self-complacent. They make up their minds that they are going to attain this or that and try to write their own ticket in the life of contemplation. They may even appear to succeed to some extent, but certain systems of spirituality, notably Zen Buddhism, places great stress on a severe, no-nonsense style of direction that makes short work of this kind of confidence. One cannot begin to face the real difficulties of life of prayer and meditation unless one is first perfectly content to be a beginner and really experience himself as one who knows little or nothing and has a desperate need to learn the bare rudiments. Those who think they know from the beginning will never, in fact, come to know anything. Uh-oh, did we just... Oh, psh. All right. So, being a beginner.
Being a beginner, where's that at?
He's kind of making sure we don't have too much self-confidence here, right?
Yeah. Or at least be open to something.
Yeah.
I'd say
There's no tricks.
Just be open to what
He's saying this over and over again. There's no tricks. There's no shortcuts. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know exactly what. I'll use this example, and I don't know if this is prayer or not. So, being a part of the Pentecostal world for a number of years, I noticed this pattern in worship. So, in Pentecostal circles, music and worship is big. It's a big part of the whole spiritual experience and being Pentecostal. It's like music is almost always a big part of services. So you can go to a church worship service. A lot of times the praise and worship will be 45 minutes of music. And you're standing up for half an hour, 45 minutes, praising God, singing 3, 4, 5 songs. Sometimes one song is just repeated over and over again for 15 minutes, right? So music is this thing that's incorporated into the, and the goal, I would say, is people want to feel like God is close. That's the goal. I want to go to church and I want to feel like God is close. And if I feel like God is close, then it's going to make me forget about my problems. It's going to give me a new perspective as I continue on my journey. It's going to, help me feel happy about life. It's going to remind me of my priorities, yada, 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 all those things, right? So there usually is there would come a time when you get to know people who lead music in these worship settings, is they kind of figure formulas. It's like, well, we're going to start real excited and upbeat. We're going to get people going right off the bat, right? So we're going to go certain drum beat, certain tempo, certain rhythm, and then we're going to do that for a couple songs. So it's like, usually it's 2 fast, 1 slow. So you get 2 songs going and everybody's excited, and then let's take it down a notch. Let's shift gears, and then we do something soft, and quiet and almost romantic, for our relationship with God. We're close, and then we start crying because God's here and all that. So this can become a formula that's used, and it's like there's this insistence we have to do 2 fast, 1 slow if we're going to have a worship service, because that's the way people feel God's presence. So the thing is, after you do this for a while, whether it's, especially if you go to a lot of worship services. I mean, sometimes some churches you're going like twice on Sunday and once on Wednesday and another on Friday and whatever. So you go into all these services and it's always 2 fast, 1 slow, 2 fast, 1 slow, 2 fast, 1 slow. And when you kind of get used to it, then it's like you can get distracted, or you can get to the place where it's not doing it. It feels
orchestrated.
routine.
Yeah.
It's orchestrated, and then it's like you're hearing the person say the same prayer over and over again. It's the exciting prayer at the beginning, and then it's this really meaningful prayer, and you start to see the patterns and all that. So I've seen that in worship. So it's possible that in prayer, maybe we get that going on. And what he's saying is that there's no tricks. The thing is, what really makes somebody experience this closeness to God, I think, has a lot to do just like where your heart is. There's this openness. A lot of times it's just like we're distracted, we have other things on our mind, we're stuck in life or whatever, and if we found a way, maybe the music helps us to kind of like forget about it for a moment, then we can have this openness and we feel close to God. If you're paying attention, sometimes you can feel close to God and you're not even expecting to. You walk around the corner and suddenly you see something and it's like, whoa. So prayer, again, is there's no tricks. We might find things that help. I'm not saying don't play music or don't start with prayer, with thanksgiving, or start with confession, do the thing that works, If you need to sit down, if you need to lay down, if you need to stand up, if you need to walk around, sometimes taking a walk and praying is like really great. And sometimes getting in a room and closing the blinds is great. Sometimes music is good. Sometimes no music is good. Find something that works, and let's just not get stuck in it or think that, don't think to ourselves, because it's kind of silly. I really need to feel close to God. Well, let me see if I can find 2 songs that are fast and 1 song that's slow, and then I can be. It's like, really, is that what it takes?
Well, I noticed I have this thing when I pick a church is I don't want a church that's looking much heavily at sin and negativity. I feel 6 days of the week I get all the negative I could use.
Yeah.
And I'm a big reflection on should I have done that or shouldn't I? So I want to go to church on Sunday morning and be lifted up, and I'm happy with that service.
Yeah. Agreed. In general, I want this to be like a very positive thing, but occasionally we do need to have a Good Friday service that's sad and dark. Sometimes we need to have a Ash Wednesday service where we're like kind of reflective and critical of ourselves, and then sometimes we need to throw it in there, and every Sunday's a new day. I don't know if we need certain things on certain Sundays, but I would say we don't want to get completely stuck in one thing, The positive thing is good. If you attend a church for a couple years and there's never ever been anything but positive, then it's like you might start feeling like you need a dose of reality.
Yeah,
and it can feel very plastic and like, put on a happy face to go to church, because you're not allowed to be sad.
That wouldn't be good either.
Yeah, but in general, yeah, we want to be happy.
But if a lot of people have questions, all kinds of questions about the church or religion or whatever. When do we do that? For example, I'm wondering how Jewish people get to heaven. Because God says you believe in Jesus, and they don't. But they believe in him, but not as a savior. So I'm wondering, how do they really get to heaven? Part of, little things like that. But
Yeah.
you like to talk about it sometimes.
Yeah, those are good things to talk about. I think we can come to better understandings as time goes on. And then there are some things that we're not going to know. What's really God's criteria? Who really gets in? There's one of the New Testament teachings of Jesus. Jesus says, "Who are you? I don't know you. And you claim to know me, but I don't know you." So he's almost saying the things that we thought were the guarantee, if I'd done what you said, I get into heaven, right? And he's saying it's really up to God, and it's really up to trusting God. And ultimately, I think that moment where we enter into paradise, we're probably all going to say, "Thanks be to God, this really didn't have anything to do with me." It's like Paul says it a lot of times. Paul, who's so wise and all that, he's more like, despite what I thought, despite my beliefs, despite my convictions, God's grace is what did it. So it's really, it's not that I'm saying this to be a heretic, but it's really not about you believing in Jesus that gets you into heaven. It's God's grace that ushers us into heaven. And it's nothing that we believe or nothing that we do that gives us the golden ticket. But it's God's grace to us. It's this gift to us. And there's a mystery to it, and it's the same with God's will. We say, "Oh, this is God's will and this is not God's will," like it's so clear cut. That's the same with heaven. Heaven is a way to make eternity clear cut. Did you get in or you didn't get in? C.S. Lewis kind of messes around with this idea with this one of his novels called The Great Divorce. And basically he describes eternity as this broad spectrum of experiences. So we all go into eternity, and the quality of your eternal experience is based on your response to God's grace. So some people go deeper into heaven, and some people kind of stay on the outskirts of heaven for different reasons. So
I remember a Sunday school lesson we had where God says he's a jealous God, and that was alarming. But I realized that, that probably meant he had Baal and all those other gods, but I really felt for me that judgment's his job, not mine. And I don't even worry about how those other people get there. I can just be me and hope that he's got them figured out.
yeah. All right, let's see where I know we're over. But I want us to move to the next topic. So let's just do like a real quick kind of a synopsis here. I'm just going to go to the underlined portions, and if there's anything that you would like to bring up of these categories, let me know. So we have this is again about being beginners, staying beginners. All right.
What page do you want?
I am 68, number 8.
I think the first line of number 7 is kind of a telling thing, that it, what in the world does that possibly mean? I can't,
People who try
to
pray and meditate above their proper level,
the proper level.
who are too eager to reach what they believe to be a high degree of prayer, get away from the truth and from reality. So this is kind of an uncomfortable part of a reality, and that is level is really a really crude way to say this, right? Because level is something we use for like first grade, second grade, third grade, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That's one way that we talk about levels of age, intellectual maturity or development, and that kind of a thing. I think there is a less mature and more mature way to be a Christian. But it's not easy for us to characterize what is more mature than something else. And then it also can be really tempting to start to label ourselves and the people around us. You know, you're a level 5, but I'm a level 10, and she's a level 3, but she's a level 15. You know, there's a way we can do that where we literally sometimes label ourselves. There's some, where did I see this? This was some kind of a cult. They actually would wear different color scarves or something because they were at different levels. We can do it with the whole deacons, elders, you know, that kind of a thing. I'm steering committee, I'm not steering committee, or whatever. But I don't think, I think we should avoid getting into judgment, because it's really, God is the one that's kind of leading us through. I think it's possible that if we were to see kind of with God's eyes, it's very likely that, you know, you can have several people sitting in a church congregation that are way more mature than the pastor that's up there delivering the message. You know, and so, but there are more mature ways to do things and less mature way to do things. And there's, we can talk about maybe what that would look like.
This just reminds me of a parable where there's a guy who lies down at the front of the wherever they have the pulpit in the old temple, and he's saying, God, I'm not worthy to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful that you love me, and whatever he said. And then in the back is a Pharisee. I can just picture him about 6'5", and he's got his arm crossed, and oh wow, thank God I was born a Jew, and thank God that I'm living in these times. And I see that was what he is
So
talking
one
about.
is more, I think they use the word justified. One's more justified. We would say one is more mature, because humility is the sign of the more mature person. Jesus talks about the first will be last and the last will be first. He says if you're really leaders, if you're really the mature ones as my disciples, you're the ones serving people. You're not the ones that are being served. So if you see someone who insists that when they come in the room, everybody needs to be like, ooh, oh, wow, the mature one is here. No, if that's what you need, you're not mature. It's humility and service that shows that you're more mature. So yeah, we can look at a lot of church leaders around us and say like, oh my gosh, we're living in an upside down world, you know. So there are levels, but it's not like, you know, it's not like, oh, if I'm at a certain level when I pray, I levitate just a little bit. You know what I mean? And it's like if that's what I desire, if I desire to levitate, then maybe I'm not as mature as I thought I was. You know, if I desire to finally be asked to be an elder in the church, if that's my desire, then maybe you're not the best person to be that. You know, you've heard it said about if somebody wants to be the president, they probably shouldn't be the president because we don't want people who want that, because that's not a good trait. You know, it's to desire power, to desire leadership and all that. It's like a true leader understands the burden of leading and the responsibility that it takes, and is hesitant to step into those roles. You know,
Convoluted.
it's convoluted.
It's upside down.
Right. But yes, this pray and meditate at their proper level. That kind of sounds like know your place. And that doesn't feel very comfortable. And I don't know. I don't know that. I don't think I would have written it this way.
He's an old guy though, he lived a long time ago, he thought differently.
This whole thing has made prayer very complicated, and sometimes
Yeah.
you think it's discouraging. Because when I sit down to pray,
Right.
then now I have to ask myself, am I doing this right?
Right.
I mean, is God listening? Or maybe he's shut me off because what is she doing? I mean,
Yeah.
So how do you?
And the funny thing is, I think in a way, he's telling us not to overcomplicate it, but it's hard not to come away from this feeling like prayer is more complicated than we thought it was. You know?
It does.
Yeah.
I feel like he's telling me to follow where my spirit leads me. Like I know a fellow who was the Pharisee, and when he prays, it's always, God, just hear this humble soul.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not putting him up here. I'm thinking, well, that's not you.
Yeah.
That's praying.
Yeah. It's ironic. It's funny to hear people say, I'm so humbled.
Yeah.
I'm so humbled by this. And usually the people that I know that have said that is like, you're so proud, you mean? So you kind of have those words backwards. All right, we're over, but why don't we will just touch on these last couple at the beginning of our next section, if we need to. I'll look over these again to see if we can kind of summarize it. But let us pick. Can somebody give me your? Can I see one of your books? Thank you. Appreciate it. For next time, we will do the first section of the virtuous life or the holiness tradition, and I will put this into the newsletter and probably email it to you also today. But we'll start with page 121, and we'll read Gregory of Nyssa, Running the Race. This is about living a virtuous life. And that's the section that we'll read for next time. So I'll send those out to you as a reminder. We'll touch on this a little bit. We'll come back to prayer in however many weeks it takes us. 12 12 more weeks, because it's kind of like two per 10 or 12, whatever the case is going to be. I don't know if we're going to go back to the introduction again or not. So it's a new author every time. It's a new take on it. So we'll have a different take on prayer. Maybe we can compare, if we can remember,